Welcome to the Disabuse podcast, where we seek to prevent, detect, investigate, and eliminate abuse in churches and faith-based organizations. And please remember to like and subscribe. Now, today we are joined with John Horwood and Ian Mayer to talk about their work on an exciting and important new resource for churches in Canada called Digital Alibi. So, John and Ian, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Good to be here, Randall.
Yeah, thank you, Randall. Maybe I'll start off and just introduce myself and then pass over to Ian.
You bet.
John Horwood, active in the Christian community for longer than I care to mention, but I did have hair, but also very active in the business community and have been trying to join the two up. So we feel like a marketplace Christian, recognizing the issue that we're going to be discussing today has been a blight on the church for many years. And so with my background, business background and wealth management background, was able to partner with Ian to develop a methodology and an ecosystem to help churches and Christian organizations deal with the subject of abuse. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, John. Yeah, good to be here, Randall. Yeah, so I'm Ian Mayer, based in the UK. My wife and I started a tech company 25 years ago, back in the late 90s, when this thing called HTML and the internet this could possibly take off. So we were fortunate to get in there. So we've been involved in tech development, app development, but we're also involved in church leadership, and we lead a network of church leaders called Catalyst. So I met John a number of years ago at some business lunch, and we hit it off, and we've been working and doing crazy things ever since. So yeah, this sort of touches both areas for me. It touches about leadership, particularly church leadership accountability, and also technology and web apps and how we can marry those two, really. Yeah, that's me. You can you go to ianmayer.com if you want to find out more about me. And John, actually, he forgot to mention his website, which johnhorwood.com. So yeah, more info there, Randall.
Excellent. Thank you both for joining me. And I will say as well, Ian, I lived for a couple of years in London, England, when I was doing my PhD at King's College. So a lot of good memories. Yeah, a lot of good memories about living over there.
Yeah.
I wanted to begin with a description from the website to get our way into the discussion. On the website for Digital Alibi, it says traditional approaches to organizational trust, like policy development, background checks, and safeguarding training, although really important, aren't always enough to protect your organization. In other words, you're pointing out that as diligent as many churches may be in terms of developing good policies, there's something missing often. And Digital Alibi, I take it, is standing in the gap. So the website then says Digital Alibi takes a fundamentally different approach. We provide a comprehensive accountability framework that actively protects both organizations and their leaders through secure reporting and proactive accountability management. So general question as we're moving into this topic of Digital Alibi, can you expand on that? Like, Jen, what's the big picture as to what Digital Alibi is and what it's accomplishing?
Yeah, a couple of comments from me, and then I'll pass it over to Ian, who's the prime mover in developing the whole process. Was that the traditional safeguarding methods that we've seen that are operating in the churches today are at least 20 years old. They were built for another time and another era and for another reason. They were primarily constructed in response to a need for insurance, for abuse insurance. And so a number of the church denominations started developing policies and procedures to protect this, that they could show to insurance companies to say, look, we've done our very best on abuse prevention. But the world's changed enormously since then, and very few people are going to read a 300 or 400 page handbook on abuse prevention that only gets updated every few years. And Ian and I came from fintech and wealth management background, where it was always a desire to provide state-of-the-art tools for these kind of abuse issues. Now, this was a different kind of abuse. This was financial abuse, but the principles remained exactly the same. And in our world, there was a constant development of tools and infrastructure and processes to stay up to date and to protect organizations against really any form of abuse, and a lot of it is reputational issues. So what we've done is apply what we've seen in that other world, which is obviously much better funded and much more advanced in this area, and then just taken the lessons learned and applied it into Digital Alibi. Ian, do you want to add to that?
Yes, yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, Randall, what we identified, I think John's right, is that we've had a lot of experience in financial services and in creating applications and web apps in that area. And we saw a lot of transferable accountability processes that could be adopted by the church. In reality, they should have been. We should be, as Christians and as church leaders, we should be moving in the accountability we preach. We should really be setting the bar high. We should be setting the standard. And I think what we identified was two major things. One is that leaders say they're accountable, or we often believe accountability is there, but then we're balancing that with privacy. And I think this is a flippant statement, but privacy can be the enemy of accountability. And we can hide behind privacy. And I think what we are trying to do, and with our tools, which are native mobile apps as well as web apps, we are enforcing, use that word reservedly, but we are making it really difficult for bad actors to exist in an ecosystem. We're doing that by wrapping technology, wrapping policy, and wrapping community around those leaders. So we've identified actually that where things go really wrong, as we say in Yorkshire, when things go south, basically it's because of a person of influence within the organization. So if we could focus in on that, we might be able to close that gap. Because usually what happens is an organizational leader fails, and that brings down the whole organization. Now, not all leaders are going to fail and bring down the whole organization. So this is the point we're making. We need to focus where the vulnerability is. So our native apps and our web apps focus around that sort of area. The other thing is that we have identified is it's very difficult for people sometimes to say something. And you always hear it, don't you? Oh, we thought something was wrong.
Oh.
We weren't quite sure. Or as a friend of mine says, I can smell a rat. There's something wrong here. And we put posters up in churches with the safeguarding officer's email address. And really what we wanted to do is create simple application that will make it really easy. Whatever concern you've got, you can disclose it, and you can disclose it confidentially. Oh, and guess what? There's going to be a third party in the room, nothing to do with the church, and we're going to know as well. You know, that just to give that, and that works it. We can say a bit more about how that works in practice. But I think those two areas are probably the key. And then we've got policy and community as well. So to give a good intro to the tech and to the process, really. Yeah.
It's very helpful. I remember the words of Jesus calling his disciples to be innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. And I think sometimes we lose that wise as serpents piece. We want to believe the best about people, and we don't want to put people on the spot. The church becomes a soft target for bad behavior, and even worse, for predatory behavior.
Yes. Yeah.
So to have those structures in place that are just going to, as you say, make it very difficult for anybody to act malevolently or just incautiously or abusively within that space. So if I want to go through some of the features then that you're offering. So the first one I wanted to start with was the role of background check. Obviously, when you're letting a person into the door, let's say as an employee, staff member at a church, it's so critical to make that initial assessment piece.
Yes.
And it's so dangerous to be persuaded by charisma, for example, the ability to woo an audience. And of course, so we need to get to things like background checks. So how does Digital Alibi function with regard to background checks in particular?
Yeah. The background check system in Canada right now is a joke, basically. It relies on a very simple system of police checks, It's very ineffective. Ian's been doing a bunch of homework in the UK and around the world and found some very interesting tools on dramatically improving these background checks.
Yeah.
Ian, tell us what you found.
Yeah, Randall, what tends to happen, and as John just said, in Canada and the UK, it's no different. Churches do CRB checks or DBS checks, and they will come back. They can do an enhanced check, and that will come back and see if anybody has been caught. That's the point, really. What happens outside of churches and in the banking industry and in financial services is advanced screening is done as a matter of course. So what we decided to do was about 18 months ago, we explored this and we started to partner with two organisations, one in Australia and one in the UK, that provide advanced screening for the financial services industry. We're at an advantage because Marata has developed an app for one of the leading advanced screening companies in the UK. So we were already in that we don't come into this sort of blind on how this works. The game changer was realizing, actually, why aren't we doing this? So our people of influence, who we've just said are vulnerable, these are the people we know whose reputations are intertwined with our organizational representations. We're offering enhanced checking. So that's everything from social media reputation to political exposure to what we would call inappropriate relationships with organizations or countries. There's a whole host of checks, and those checks are really detailed and really in depth. And here's the kicker, really. As a church leader, you may think, oh, I don't know whether I really want that. And I think if you're asking that question, I'm going to be brutal. It's time to get another church leader, because I don't think we can do that. As Christians, we need to be. I'll give a personal example. I never clear my internet history, ever. And there's two reasons for that. The first is, actually, I can always find stuff really easily that I need, that I use. What did I look at a year ago? And it was really, but actually the other reason is quite interesting spiritually, is that anybody can have a look, can't they? Good old look at Ian's internet history. And sometimes when I say that particularly to guys, they're like, ooh, or, and I think we need to set the standard. Really, I think, particularly as Christians, we should be setting the bar really high. So, yeah, the advanced screening is partnering with two major organizations that provide global, what would be called in banking and finance would be PEP and sanctions searches. So that's politically exposed people. Sanctions where there are organizations or individuals where there are relational connections and there shouldn't be.
Yeah. To follow up from that, first of all, in regard to your comment about getting another church leader if they don't want that kind of oversight, I have an app that my family we use, and it lets each one of us know where everyone else is at any given time. For example, like if we're supposed to meet at 2 p.m., I can look on the app and see where my wife is in traffic, and I don't have to call her and say, "Where are you?" And if I had a friend say, "Oh, I wouldn't want that kind of oversight. I wouldn't want my spouse to know where I am," I'd be like wondering why not? Like, what is the concern
exactly,
here?
Randall,
Same kind of logic. Now I'm wondering, do these checks, is it like a one and done thing? Is it done periodically? How does it function in that regard?
They're renewable every 24 hours, so they're cyclic. Okay. So these are not just like you can set this to recur. So you can log into a dashboard. You can do the check. I did a check on me. I did a check on myself. Thought, let's have a go. I turned out to be really trustworthy and okay. So that's good news. But it will recheck constantly and refresh those checks. And the checks are reasonably, you're probably talking about £20 for a check, whatever that is
which is much cheaper.
It's not a lot. It's not a lot more than a CRB or a DBS check, to be fair, but obviously it's far more detailed and it just goes out. Even on the dark web, we're looking at the whole digital ecosystem to see where this person's digital fingerprint is and are they okay?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's extra. It's not included in the subscription, but it's something that we're saying, look, you should do, but certainly before you employ somebody, you should do that. If they're going to be a person of influence in your organization, perhaps you want to do some retrospective checking as well.
All right. I
Yeah.
wanted to go to another feature. So I understand that Digital Alibi offers monitoring and tracking when staff, let's say, are meeting at-risk persons. So say
Yeah.
more about that, how that functions.
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned the app you and your family use. It's similar technology and geolocation, only it's bespoke for you to be able to, you can click and set up permanent monitoring, just ping every 15 minutes where you are, and it will save that information. The information will be available to the chief accountability officer within your organization, or you can set monitoring between certain work periods. So if you say, well, actually, in fairness, I only want to be monitored when I'm at work, I would ask a question why, actually. But then anyway, never mind. That is built in as a feature. And then that information is stored. In the second version of the app, we intend to add a context option. So you can, if you're meeting with someone and you think, actually, I'd like to add a voice, text, or image context to this, so that when I come back to this in a year's time, I can remember, oh yeah, that's why I was in that nightclub. So adding context to the app will be a feature that will come down the line. But also, yeah, ultimately, Randall, it does what your app does, and it locates and monitors. Yeah,
Just a question to follow up, protection of data. Obviously, I think we're still just coming to terms with the degree to which our information, let's say through surfing the web or something, becomes monetized. It could be a breach of our privacy and be used in different ways by bad actors. So I'm wondering, in terms of the amount of information that gets collected about a person, is there a risk that it could be monetized, that it could be breached?
Yeah, there's always a risk. I would not be truthful if people who are in tech can say there's no risk. That's not true. There's always risk.
Yeah.
With this, we are applying the European data security and privacy guidelines, as opposed to Canada or STEL or any other territories, which are some of the strictest in the world. In terms of access to the data, we don't have access to the data. Only the chief accountability officer does. Okay. Within the organization, and how long the data is stored is entirely down to the organization, but it is their data and it is not stored, it's not seen by us, as opposed to the confidential disclosure service where we're involved in seeing the information because we are the trusted third party, as it were.
Yeah. That's very helpful. Yeah. People often wonder what happens to information.
We put a big piece on the website actually about security and privacy, so it's worth checking that out. Yeah.
Yeah. And the primary goal of this thing was really about reputational protection of the church. And I think what Ian and I have found in the past with our experience in financial services is that there are lots and lots of Me Too claims now. There are lots and lots of spurious claims, and this is the best possible defense that you can have, is a track record of where you were and what you talked about. It saved me repeatedly in my career where people were willing to try to take cheap shots at you, and I was able to prove that I wasn't in the room or that conversation didn't happen. And I think that's one of the key reasons for this particular part of the offering.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes they certainly can be blindsided when they get specifically historic abuse allegations and so on. Something allegedly happened 5-8 years ago, whatever. And if you had a track record over time of information, and you could go back and say, look, this is the tracking of my movements on that day. These are my contemporaneous notes from that time. I would say as an investigator, that would be invaluable information for me to assess the validity of a claim.
Yeah.
I had a claim for a financial loss that was 10 years old, and it was related to a deceased estate where a lady that passed away and the inheritors had some arguments and questions with me. Unfortunately, I'd kept all of those old books and all of those old records. And I'm so thankful that I did.
And that's probably a good reason for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
people to keep that information then over time and build that history
Mm.
with
Yeah.
the service of Digital Alibi. So let's turn to another question, whistleblowing. So
Mm.
a lot of churches, they may have a whistleblower policy, they may not, but even if they do, they may not have any secure way to have protect a whistleblower's identity, etc. Can Digital Alibi offer any resources in that regard?
Yeah, CDS, the Confidential Disclosure Service, is a platform that comes with the subscription that enables organizations to offer a disclosure route, no matter, and it can be used for anything. It doesn't have to be criminal or illegal. It could just be a concern where somebody is not comfortable with something that's happening, or so they can make the disclosure. The way in which the disclosure is made is there are lots of different doorways through which people can make the disclosure. So there's a floating widget on the website. There's QR codes. There's links in email footers. So the idea is that this would be throughout the organization's admin. It would be really easy for someone to just click the link and make the disclosure. Now, what happens is the disclosure is given a unique number, and then the organization is informed of the disclosure. They're not informed of who's made the disclosure. If the person wants to do it anonymously, they can. If they don't, if they want to put their information in, only we can see that information, which could be useful down the line for an investigator. And then the organization has to respond to that disclosure. And if it's a serious disclosure, we will ensure that something is done, that an investigation is launched. And interestingly, it will sit as let's say it amounts to nothing. It will sit as a sort of closed disclosure on the organization's record. So you can put in we have a portal, and as a member of the public, you put in the organization's number, and it will say how many disclosures, what are currently active, what are historical. Won't tell you the detail, but it will tell you that people have had concerns. Yeah, I think it's a really easy tool to use. It's just a real no-brainer in terms of it answers the question when somebody has said, I would have said something, but I would like to have said it in front of someone independent.
Mm-hmm.
How do I do that? Especially when I want to go to the safeguarding officer and I've got a problem. It's the safeguarding officer I've got a problem with or whatever. You can do this and you can remain anonymous as well. Yeah,
it is so important,
yeah.
especially when there's a lot of, you might have a church of 5,000 people, not many in Canada, but you might have a mega church where you might have some degree of separation. But when you're in a small church, as most churches are, right? They may be 120 people. Everybody knows everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just makes it that much more difficult to kind of step forward. And so it's a really important resource.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to come to the tagline, accountability reinforced, that I read on the website, which I think is just great.
Thank you,
So
Ron.
it's good marketing because it's two words and it communicates evocatively, powerfully that this is about you're coming alongside, for example, the policies of the organization, plan to protect or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think as John said earlier, you might have a 300-page policy manual, but if people are not regularly reading it, the policies are only as good as their enforcement.
Yeah.
For Digital Alibi to come alongside, I think it's just so important. And also from my end, as a workplace investigator, where we investigate often when policies have not been adhered to, it seems to me that we're like I'm a motorcyclist. So it's like to be safe on a motorcycle, you need to have someone looking out for your brakes and your tire tread, and you need to wear pads and you need to wear a helmet, and all of it contributes to the safety of riding the motorcycle, and we're all contributing to safety. So is there anything more you'd like to say about how Digital Alibi functions in this space alongside the policies to just create a safer place for church and to minimize the risk to the organization and to vulnerable individuals within it?
Yeah. Do you want to go first, John, and then I'll...
Yeah, a couple of thoughts there. I think my experience where I've seen problems at the churches I've attended are often not the sort of the direct abuse cases that we often think of. It can be all kinds of financial coercion, there's just a whole bunch of these other things that typically don't get collected and don't get dealt with properly. And the other thing is the traditional models of assigning policies and procedures without any enforcement or proof of effort have clearly failed. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the endless problems that, and I guess, Randall, our job is to make sure you're not so busy, or perhaps you're just working on the ones that are really important and interesting, and not the stuff that shouldn't fall through.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think accountability, particularly within the Christian context and Christian life and church life, it is foundational to everything we are and we say we are. And what's really interesting, I think, is accountability is enforced by our brothers and sisters around us. The nature of accountability is that it's relational, that actually we have to work at it and we have to allow others to enforce it and to bring it about and to question. And I think we should be good at that. The Bible tells us we should be good at that. What we're trying to do with Digital Alibi is using quite a bit of tech and quite a bit of process and a bit of e-learning and all the things we've learned and the sanction checks and everything to just say, we'll help with that. We will help with that. And we can never say a bad actor can't escape, but we're going to make it really difficult for a bad actor to live and work within an organization.
Yeah, I like to say, if someone wants to steal your car and they're determined, they'll steal your car. But for 99% of people, you lock the doors, you have an alarm system, you put a club on the steering wheel. That's going to eliminate 99% of people, and it's just going to make it that much safer. And in my case, I drive a manual transmission. That's going to knock out the other 1% who don't know how to drive it.
I love it. Ron.
Or you could just live in the garage where nobody can see it.
Exactly, that too. One more step right there. Okay, let's talk about cost. What does it look like for churches to sign up for Digital Alibi? So you referenced it being a subscription service. So what would the subscription cost be? How would that end up looking?
So we've got some early adopter cost prices at the moment, John, haven't we? Which is, so for a small church, say 50 people with probably one person of influence, about $30-40 Canadian dollars a month. And then for a much larger church, say they've got like 30 people of influence, a much bigger organization, we'll be looking around about $150-200 a month, I think, John. Was that about? That's where we're pitching at the moment.
Yeah. The idea is to keep the cost as low as we can so we can get very fast adoption. So that it's not going to be a major financial decision for a church or for a Christian group to join up. And then over time, we'll probably extend the market into other groups. But at the moment, we really want to use this to make it fast, to make it cheap, and make it easy for churches to protect themselves, protect their reputations.
So it's not, the pricing doesn't restrict features. So even if you're on the $30, you get all the features, you just get one license for the native app. But you get all the rest, because it wouldn't be right to compromise the sort of accountability effectiveness by only introducing features on payment. We've got other features in the pipeline as well, which we are currently working on as well. Things like policy management systems and online reputation management systems and things like that. So lots happening, Randall.
And I guess in the back of our minds, when we were thinking about the pricing, we still haven't been able to finalize this yet, but the idea is that with this pricing, the insurance protection that the churches need should be available and discounted for the use of this app. That's the value proposition going forward too. In a year's time, so that the churches will find a very nice discount on their insurance, or in the cases where they've already had abuse issues, that this may give them an opportunity to be reconsidered for insurance.
I think, first of all, as a workplace investigator, I'm not infrequently helping churches to understand the value of when there is a complaint, of handling it with a professional, rigorous, external, objective investigator versus attempting to save some money and handle something inside the organization, by helping them to appreciate things like the institutional risk, the risk of lawsuits, the risk of further abuse, conflicts of interest, etc., that come with handling something internally. And I also certainly appreciate the value of what Digital Alibi is bringing. But if somebody were to say, wow, that I get the value, but that still sounds like a lot of money, say something to that person who maybe isn't appreciating how important this is. I'll just say that you were both coming out of financial background where these systems have been in place for years. And okay, money is important, but human lives, infinitely more important. Should, in my view, should the church not be on the vanguard of having
Absolutely.
adopted, and hey, better late than never, but just say something about that, the value
Yeah.
of Digital Alibi as a proposition to protect churches and people within them.
Yeah, it's you from the get-go, you can't put a price, can you, on accountability and on preventing misconduct. So you simply can't do that. But if you just simply went on an ROI in terms of what the reputational damage and financial damage could be to an organization, and I won't name names, but we've seen them across Canada and across the UK, then it's a very small investment, really, for that prevention. So I think that would be my sort of view, John.
Yeah, and I think if you compared this to the price of insurance, you're going to find this is the best value insurance that you're likely to see.
Yeah.
If you want to remain uninsured, that's a scary prospect.
Yeah, I had a friend once who had a car that he hadn't insured because he said, oh, I'm just making a quick trip to the market, so I'm not going to bother renewing the insurance. And I thought, okay, you probably won't get in an accident. You probably won't hit a pedestrian. But what if you do? Like, it's just the level of risk that people assume. And it's certainly no different in a church setting.
No.
Where can people learn more about Digital Alibi?
Yeah, Randall, they can go to digitalalibi.me. They can Google Digital Alibi safeguarding tools, and that should bring us straight up to the top. They'll find lots of information and lots of free tools as well on the website. So we've got if you're wondering what a person of interest, you've got some leaders and you think, are they persons of influence? You can do a personal influence test completely free, and it will tell you where we think they are on a scale. You can do our misconduct allegation preparedness survey. That's completely free. There's lots of information about the confidential disclosure service, lots of FAQs, and they're not behind paywalls. You can go and have a look at those. And we're on social media, of course. You can follow us on X, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Excellent. Digitalalibi.me.
Yes.
I commend everybody to check it out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, John and Ian. It has been great. And I want to thank you in particular for this important work that you're doing for the church.
Thank you. Thank you, Randall.
Randall,
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to meet you and to join the podcast, and wish you every success.
Thank you.
Thank you.